I bought this house the way some people buy a lifeline: stubborn, trembling hands on the keys, and a checklist of never again taped to the back of my brain. I'm Emily Sanders, 28. For years, I bounced between roommates who treated my kindness like a revolving credit line. Dishes left in the sink for days, rent paid late with excuses, midnight strangers sleeping on my couch. I learned to sleep with one ear open and learned the value of margins. A locked door. A mortgage in my name. A place where I could breathe without negotiating for space. I work hard, not because I love spreadsheets or late-night repair calls, but because I wanted a small kingdom that answered to me. I painted the kitchen a ridiculous, impossible teal. I climbed ladders on Saturdays to fix gutters, read tutorials until my eyes fuzzed, and learned what homeowners insurance actually covers. The house became proof that I could make something steady out of chaos. So when my mother, Linda, called saying she needed to crash for a few months while she saved first and last month's rent, I said yes before my brain caught up. People who know Linda describe her like a weather front: dramatic, unpredictable, warm 1 minute and squally the next. She'd had a rough year, the kind that strips down pride and leaves you with a suitcase and a phone number for your daughter. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself I was doing the right thing. They arrived on a rainy Thursday, the car packed like a moving van. Linda came in with a grin and too much perfume. Behind her, Derek walked in like he owned the weather. He introduced himself as her husband. Married. My mother and a new husband. I remember the way the air thinned in the living room, as if the house was suddenly one of those balloons you hold underwater, tense, waiting. I didn't ask questions. I didn't say, wait, when did this happen? Or, is this a forever thing? Because my instinct was to give cover, to be the harbor for the storm. I fed them dinner. I showed them which towel was mine. I left the teal-painted kitchen intact, the mug with the chipped rim that I bring to bed with coffee at 3 a.m. I told myself boundaries could wait until the crisis passed. But the thing about letting someone into a house isn't just handing over space. It's handing over your narrative. That mortgage I signed was more than a monthly bill. It was the promise that my life could be simple and private. Letting them in felt, in a very small and immediate way, like erasing the word mine. I felt the edges of that erasure like a slow bruise. Still, for the first few weeks, we coasted on that fragile goodwill. They cleaned sometimes. Linda hummed through the house like a stray song, and Derek made a point of fixing things that had been on my to-do list for years. It was small kindnesses that felt like preemptive apologies, and I made room for them. I told myself we'd get through it, that this was footing the bill for a life raft. What I didn't bargain on was how patience wears thin when it's the only currency left. The house stayed cool that first month, but the quiet had a tension under it, like the night before thunder. I kept to my routines, but I watched. I measured each smile and each silence against the mortgage notice I had framed in my head. The stakes weren't dramatic at first. No shouting matches, no threats, just a steady, quiet encroachment that made me feel less like the homeowner and more like a guest in my own life. The ask didn't come as a roar. It came as a polite sentence, the sort of thing people use to test tolerance before they overstep it. It was a Tuesday. I was rinsing out a mug in the sink, watching the water bead on the teal paint, when Derek leaned against the doorway like he'd been architected to look casual. He smiled with the confidence of someone who assumes the world is a buffet, and you've just handed him the plate. "Emily," he said, "we should probably start chipping in. $800 a month each seems fair." For a second, I thought he meant a joint household fund, groceries or something, so I blinked and blinked again. He meant rent. For me. In my house. Linda hovered behind him with a dish towel in her hands, her face trying to be neutral but failing by looking small and apologetic. Derek went on, smooth and rehearsed. "Linda's been cooking and keeping things tidy, and I've been doing a lot of the repairs. Helps to balance things out. You're contributing, Emily, but you could help more by taking half the rent." He had a way of making arithmetic sound like morality. 800. He said it like that number was a kindness. My mouth said polite things first because I'd been raised to escalate family tension in the grocery store. You mean rent? In my house? The words came out like someone else's, halfway between incredulous and exhausted. I listed the obvious: the mortgage, homeowner's insurance, property taxes, utility bills that flare up in winter, the repairs I did last month because I couldn't wait for help. I felt ridiculous enumerating the basics of my life like receipts in a courtroom, but I did it anyway. Derek waved a hand and shrugged. Those are just expenses. We all have to pay something. Think of it as fairness. He sounded like a man who had read one article about household equality and decided it explained the universe. Linda tried to smooth it over. We can help with groceries, Em. We don't want to be a burden. Her voice was small in a way that made my chest ache. I wanted to hug her and also shake her until she remembered who she was living with. What poisoned the moment wasn't the money alone. It was the surprising entitlement in Derek's tone and my mother's muted assent. It was that they had turned the narrative of my house into a negotiation where my mortgage counts as just an expense, and their presence translated into moral credit. It felt like being lectured in my own living room. I tried reason first. I explained again, calmly, that I pay the mortgage and the insurance, and I wasn't asking anyone to be homeless. I said that if they wanted to contribute, great, groceries, gas money, a portion of utilities. But rent? Rent in my own home felt like a power play. It felt like an attempt to put a price on my patience and call it fairness. Derek's expression hardened the tiniest fraction. We're not trying to control you, he said, but this is the real world. If you're going to have people living under your roof, you need to accept that there are costs. You can't act surprised when those costs come up. He sounded almost offended at my surprise, like I'd committed a social felony. Linda didn't intervene. She looked at the table, at the teal streak of paint I had scolded myself into choosing 2 years ago, and then she left the room. After they went to bed, I lay awake and counted the small things. The nights I'd patched a roof shingle at dusk, the loan payment that ate a third of my paycheck, the relief of having one private corner of the world. Anger wasn't immediate. It was slow and metallic, like rust under skin. Betrayal is always worse when it's quiet, when the person you protect starts writing different rules for everyone else. By morning, the anger had a direction. I stopped rehearsing polite rebuttals and started making lists. What I pay, what I allow, what boundaries I expect. I couldn't shake the way Derek's ask had shifted something fundamental. Charging me rent in my own home wasn't just bad manners, it was a reframing of respect into a ledger. That ledger included my mortgage as an afterthought and their contributions as leverage. When I walked past them at breakfast, Derek met my eyes like a dare. Linda mumbled something about eggs and kept stirring. I felt the air change. The house wasn't the same private place I'd worked so hard to build. It felt precarious, as if any moment someone could put a price tag on everything I owned. That afternoon, I did something I rarely do when I'm angry. I made a plan. Not a shouting plan, not a melodramatic confrontation, but a practical one. I wanted options. I wanted a way to stop feeling like my home could be negotiated away with the pleasant cadence of a man leaning in a doorway. Monday felt like a test I hadn't asked for. I called a realtor first thing and listened while she walked me through numbers like they were weather reports. Steady, unemotional, exact. Market rent for that master around here is about $1,400, she said. The number landed in my chest like a small, solid stone. 1,400. I had been prepared for negotiation, for awkward conversations and compromises, but not for the sharp clarity of a market price that spelled out exactly how much space my generosity had been costing me. I didn't stop there. I reached out to a leasing agent I'd found online, John, 38, with the kind of clipped, efficient voice that makes bureaucracy feel like therapy. I let him come by on Monday afternoon with a folder of forms and printed clauses. I watched from the doorway while he explained. In jargon, I pretended to understand why having a formal rental agreement drawn up by a third party was the only sane way to separate personal mercy from business. Family's messy, he said, and the way he said messy was like a sharp little mercy of its own. When he named the fair market value for the master bedroom, $4,100, I surprised even myself. I could have used that number like a scalpel. I could have set it to sting. Instead, I signed my name under a number that felt like a choice, $1,200. Lower than market, but not a charity. Lower than what Derek had arrogantly demanded, but high enough to make the point. This is a business decision, not a martyr's sacrifice. John asked me if I was sure. My hand didn't shake when I wrote it. Bringing a neutral party into our living room shifted the atmosphere like opening a window. Derek tried to charm his way through it. Jokes about keeping the peace and how we all chip in. But John was clinical and precise, handing them paperwork and saying things like, "If everyone's comfortable, we'll sign and set a move-out date if needed." He used the word comfortable in a tone that suggested he didn't expect them to be. The argument that followed was small and ordinary and devastating at the same time. Linda's voice trembled between apology and deflection. Derek's bravado leaked out in a series of brittle, panicked statements about unfairness and how he'd been helping. At one point, Derek said, loud and theatrical, "We can make this work." And that was when everything collapsed. Not with a shout, but with the sudden implausibility of his own sentence. He looked like a man who'd been given a mirror that showed him exactly how he'd looked walking into someone else's life and trying to reorder it. By Friday, they were gone. Derek packed with a kind of speed that suggested planning had been underway long before the paperwork. Linda hugged me at the door, a hug that was equal parts apology and relief. I said things I meant and things I didn't. Take care, good luck, and watched them go into the street with suitcases that seemed smaller than the space they'd occupied in my head. The house is quieter now, not because silence is empty, but because it's mine again in the way that matters. I sip coffee from the chipped mug, and the teal paint is just teal. I feel less like someone who tolerates encroachment and more like someone who drew a line and quietly enforced it. There was no dramatic reveal, no theatrical trap. The revenge was the paperwork, the third party, the refusal to let family sentiment be a loophole. It was practical, a little petty by necessity, and perfectly proportioned. I don't feel triumphant in a comic book way. I feel relieved and oddly chastened, as if I learned that kindness without boundaries becomes a currency others spend. There is a steadier air in the rooms, a sense of keeping your own things yours. That alone felt like justice.